Tonight, we drift back more than 15 million years into an ocean shaped by warmth, abundance, and a predator unlike anything before or since. A shadow large enough to hunt whales longer than modern buses, moving through seas that rewarded size and strength above all else. For millions of years, this animal thrived. It grew immense, it fed well, and the ocean provided what it needed. Its teeth crushed bone, its bite force surpassed any known predator, and the fossil record shows a species that remained successful for an extraordinarily long time. What makes its disappearance so unusual is what did not happen. The oceans did not empty, whales did not vanish, sharks did not collapse. Marine ecosystems remained rich and complex. Smaller predators endured, faster hunters adapted. But the largest predator Earth ever produced did not make it. But why? Why does the strongest predator Earth ever produced simply vanish while others remain? How does a design that worked for millions of years stop working? And why would evolution allow such a successful form to fade away without a single moment of collapse? Tonight, we drift softly into those ancient waters to follow the rise and the slow disappearance of Megalodon. But before we sink too deep, if you feel like sharing, let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what time it is there. I love seeing how far across the globe these gentle explorations travel. And if you enjoy videos like this, it would mean a lot if you gave this one a like or subscribed for more sleepy science journeys like this. So now, take a deep breath in, let it out slowly, and together, let us sink beneath ancient seas. The ocean Megalodon entered was not hostile or sparse, but generous in a way that is difficult to imagine today. Heat lingered in the water from surface to depth, carried by a planet whose climate had settled into a long, warm patience. Currents moved slowly and predictably, spreading nutrients across vast distances, allowing life to expand outward rather than retreat into refuges. The sea did not feel crowded with borders. It felt open, wide, and permissive, a place where growth was rarely punished and abundance arrived with regularity. Along the continents, shallow seas stretched far inland, flooding low valleys and coastal plains. These broad shelves warmed easily under the sun, becoming nurseries for plankton, fish, and increasingly large marine animals. Food webs thickened rather than narrowing, stacking layer upon layer until energy moved upward in immense quantities. Where modern oceans often funnel life into thin bands, these ancient waters spread it generously, supporting bodies that could grow heavy, slow, and powerful without immediately paying a penalty. Within this warmth, marine mammals began to expand in scale and diversity. Early whales grew larger and more numerous, their migrations tracing long, predictable paths through productive waters. Each generation carried more mass, more stored energy, more meat moving steadily through the sea. This was not a sudden explosion, but a gradual filling of the ocean with living cargo, drifting, breathing, feeding, and reproducing at a pace that reshaped the balance of consumption below them. In such an environment, size was not excess, size was an opportunity. A large predator could afford to patrol vast distances, knowing encounters would come. A failed pursuit did not threaten immediate collapse because the next successful hunt was rarely far away. Warm water reduces the energetic cost of movement, softening the metabolic burden that large bodies usually carry. Heat moved easily through flesh, easing the demands of temperature regulation and allowing energy to be spent on growth rather than maintenance. The structure of these seas quietly favored power over speed. Strength mattered more than efficiency because the ocean reliably paid its debts. A predator built for force could overpower prey without needing repeated precision. Massive jaws, reinforced teeth, and thick muscle translated directly into survival, not as luxury, but as practicality. The ecosystem did not yet reward subtlety, it rewarded presence. For millions of years, this balance held. Warmth sustained abundance, abundance sustained giants, and giants shaped the flow of life around them. The ocean itself carried the cost of maintaining such bodies, absorbing inefficiencies without strain. Energy moved upward, pooled in massive forms, and returned slowly through death and decay, feeding the system that produced them. Megalodon did not evolve as an exception to this world, it emerged as a natural expression of it. The ocean was wide enough, warm enough, and rich enough to make size not just viable, but optimal. In those ancient seas, being enormous was not a risk to be managed. It was the safest investment the planet could offer. Long before its absence became visible in stone, Megalodon announced itself through force, not through speed or subtlety, but through pressure so extreme it reshaped bone itself. Its jaws were wide, reinforced, built to close with an authority no ocean predator has since matched. When they came together, the water around them displaced violently, a brief distortion followed by silence and ruin. What remained was broken matter, fractured ribs, compressed vertebrae, evidence not of struggle, but of finality. Modern estimates, drawn from tooth structure, jaw mechanics, and muscle attachment, suggest a bite that exceeded anything known in the living world, not just stronger than a great white, but operating on an entirely different scale of compression. Where today's apex sharks tear and bleed their prey, Megalodon crushed it. Bone became vulnerable. Dense tissue offered little resistance. A single successful strike delivered not prolonged pursuit, but immediate resolution, turning massive prey into manageable remains drifting slowly downward. Compared to the modern great white, the difference is not merely size, but intent, written into form. Great whites rely on speed bursts and repeated strikes, removing energy from prey in stages. Megalodon did not need patience. Its jaws carried certainty. Each closure converted stored muscle power directly into destruction, minimizing chase time and maximizing return. In an ocean that paid generously, this design thrived. Every hunt, when successful, delivered enormous energy in exchange for brief effort, yet embedded within this spectacle was a quiet imbalance. Such power required immense investment. Muscle mass had to be maintained constantly, even when the ocean fell silent between encounters. Teeth large enough to withstand crushing forces grew, broke, and were replaced continuously, each replacement drawing resources. The skeleton itself bore the cost, thickened and reinforced to survive stresses no smaller body would ever experience. The great white, by contrast, operates within narrower margins. Its bite is lethal enough, but restrained. It tears rather than shatters. It needs less muscle to maintain, less energy to deploy, less recovery time between attempts. Its efficiency lies not in overwhelming force, but in consistency across environments that shift, cool, or thin unpredictably. Power, when abundant, conceals its cost. In the warm seas that once stretched wide, Megalodon's bite functioned like a certainty machine, converting life into fuel with brutal reliability. But certainty relies on repetition, and repetition depends on a system that keeps offering opportunity. When prey is plentiful and movement costs are low, extreme strength carries no immediate disadvantage. It feels permanent. As conditions begin to tighten, even slightly, the equation changes without announcement. A missed strike no longer vanishes inside abundance. Recovery takes longer. Energy reserves dip deeper. The jaws remain powerful, unchanged, but the space around them grows less forgiving. What once guaranteed success now demands perfect alignment of timing, temperature, and availability. The fossil record preserves the force of Megalodon, clearly etched into damaged bone and scattered teeth. What it does not preserve is the growing silence between meals. Power did not fade, the ocean around it did, and in that narrowing space, strength alone became heavier to carry, even while remaining absolute. Size carries weight long before it carries advantage. In living bodies, mass is never inert. Every additional layer of muscle, every widening of bone, every thickened organ adds a quiet, permanent demand that does not sleep. Even in stillness, a giant is working. Heat must be maintained. Tissue must be repaired. Blood must be moved through distances that grow longer with every generation of growth. The ocean may appear calm around such a body, but inside it, energy is always being spent. As animals scale upward, metabolism does not follow in simple proportion. Larger bodies are more efficient per unit of mass, yet the total cost rises relentlessly. A predator the size of Megalodon could store enormous energy after a successful hunt, but that reserve drained steadily whether prey appeared or not. Time between meals mattered. Distance between opportunities mattered. The margin for error narrowed, not dramatically, but persistently. Day after day, year after year. For smaller hunters, hunger is sharp but temporary. Their bodies require less to keep moving, less to remain warm, less to recover from exertion. They can fail repeatedly without courting collapse because their losses are measured in hours or days. A giant operates on longer clocks. Its failures are quieter, but heavier. Each missed opportunity subtracts from a reserve built slowly and spent constantly. Recovery stretches longer. The body becomes a ledger where losses accumulate invisibly. Hunting at extreme scale magnifies this imbalance. Pursuit demands power. Acceleration requires muscle mass that must already be fed. Turning a massive body through water costs energy before prey is ever contacted. Even success carries expense. The exertion of the chase, the struggle, the digestion of vast quantities of dense tissue. When the hunt fails, the cost remains, but the return disappears entirely. In stable conditions, this arithmetic hides beneath abundance. Food appears reliably enough that deficits are erased before they matter. Over long spans, however, small changes shift the balance. Slight increases in distance, slight decreases in encounter rate, slight changes in temperature that raise baseline metabolic demands. None of these announce themselves. Together, they tighten the energy line until it begins to feel rigid. Giants walk this line constantly. Their success depends not only on strength, but on consistency. Regular access to high-value prey is not a luxury, it is the mechanism that keeps the system intact. Remove even a fraction of that reliability, and the cost of size reveals itself, not as catastrophe, but as attrition. Energy drains more quickly than it can be replaced. Reserves no longer refill completely. Over time, the difference between breaking even and falling short becomes consequential. Growth slows, recovery lingers, reproductive investment becomes harder to sustain. The body remains formidable, unchanged in appearance, unchanged in potential, yet increasingly expensive to keep alive within an ocean that no longer offers surplus without effort. The price of being a giant is not paid all at once. It is paid gradually, in unseen withdrawals, in hunts that almost succeed, in calories that nearly balance. Strength does not vanish. It simply becomes harder to afford. Cooling does not arrive in the ocean as a dramatic event. It seeps. It settles. It drifts downward through layers of water that remember heat long after the air above has changed. While continents respond quickly to shifting climate, the sea answers on slower terms, storing warmth, releasing it reluctantly, then adjusting its internal balance with quiet persistence. Over long spans of time, even small changes begin to reshape everything that lives beneath the surface. As global temperatures gradually declined, polar regions began to lock water into ice. Not all at once, and not catastrophically, but steadily enough to redraw the boundaries of the world's seas. Ice sheets expanded, reflecting sunlight, reinforcing the cooling trend, and anchoring cold at the top and bottom of the planet. The effect reached far beyond the poles. Ocean circulation patterns adjusted, currents shifted their routes, and the distribution of heat became less forgiving. Water carries temperature differently than air. It transfers heat efficiently, surrounds bodies completely, and pulls warmth away without pause. For marine life, this means that cold does not simply chill the skin, it penetrates muscle, blood, and core alike. Maintaining internal balance requires constant energy, and as ambient temperatures fall, that demand increases everywhere, not just at the extremes. In earlier eras, warmth buffered even the largest bodies from these costs. Cooling weakened that buffer. Areas that once offered stable, gentle conditions grew less predictable. Seasonal variation intensified, thermal gradients sharpened, the ocean became patchier in its hospitality, offering comfort in fewer places and for shorter spans. Movement between regions demanded more energy, and remaining within shrinking warm zones compressed life into narrower corridors. The expansion of polar ice also altered the geography of shallow seas. Sea levels fell gradually as water became stored on land in frozen form. Broad continental shelves narrowed, warm coastal habitats fragmented. What had once been continuous stretches of productive water broke into separated regions, each with its own constraints. For creatures dependent on scale and space, these shifts carried quiet consequences. Cold affects chemistry as well as comfort. Metabolic reactions slow, digestion takes longer, recovery stretches out, energy budgets tighten from multiple directions at once. For smaller animals, these pressures could be offset with flexibility, altered behavior, and shorter generation times. For giants, the adjustment window was narrower. Their bodies remained the same size, their demands unchanged, but the environment supporting them delivered less surplus. The ocean did not become empty. Life persisted, adapted, diversified, but the background conditions that once absorbed inefficiency without strain began to thin. Heat, once abundant, became something to seek rather than assume. Movement, once easy, became costly. The sea grew less willing to subsidize mass simply because it existed. Cooling did not target Megalodon specifically. It altered the rules quietly, reshaping the ledger by which survival was balanced. Strength remained intact, size remained imposing, yet the water itself carried less tolerance for excess. In an environment that no longer held warmth evenly, every large body felt the change simultaneously, not as a blow, but as a slow recalibration that never reversed. Warm water once spread across the ocean like a wide permission slip. It did not announce itself loudly, yet it shaped where bodies could linger, where energy flowed easily, and where large forms could move without constant cost. Within these bands of gentler temperature, Megalodon appears again and again in the fossil record, its teeth surfacing along ancient coastlines that once held steady warmth. These were not random appearances. They trace preference, and preference quietly defines boundaries. As the planet cooled, those warm regions did not vanish outright. They contracted. What had been broad corridors became narrower zones, stitched unevenly along lower latitudes. Warmth pulled back from higher regions, retreating toward the equator, leaving behind water that no longer offered the same metabolic ease. For animals adapted to those former conditions, the ocean did not close, but it narrowed, becoming selective in ways that had not existed before. Remaining within favorable temperatures carried consequences of its own. Geographic restriction compresses life. Movement options are thin. Prey paths converge. Competition intensifies even without direct confrontation. A predator bound to warm water must follow prey that may not share the same limits. As cooling reshaped migration routes and seasonal patterns, staying within thermal comfort demanded longer travel or longer waiting, both of which carried energetic costs. The danger of this trap lies in its subtlety. Warm water still existed, still supported life, still felt familiar, yet it no longer formed a continuous stage. It became fragmented, separated by cooler barriers that required energy to cross or risk to endure. For large bodies, crossing into colder zones was not immediately lethal, but it increased baseline demand, pulling energy away from growth, reproduction, and recovery. Smaller predators navigated these boundaries differently. Their reduced needs allowed brief forays into less ideal conditions, short hunts in cooler water, flexible responses to shifting prey. Giants carried inertia. Their size made adaptations slower, their mass anchoring them to conditions that once rewarded it. What had been an advantage hardened into preference, and preference slowly hardened into constraint. Warmth also influenced reproduction. Juvenile megalodon remains clustered in shallow coastal areas that were once reliably warm. As cooling lowered sea levels and altered coastal temperatures, these spaces changed character. Safe zones shrank in area and duration. Young sharks faced narrower windows for growth before exposure to colder water increased mortality. Population pressure began not with adults, but quietly, early in life. None of this required sudden collapse. The trap tightened gradually, defined by lost options rather than overt threats. Megalodon did not chase warmth blindly, but remained within it because its body had been shaped by a long history of reliable heat. As those waters grew less extensive, the ocean asked for flexibility more than force. Geographic restriction carries a final consequence. When favorable space contracts, absence elsewhere becomes meaningful. A species may remain dominant within its shrinking range, yet still decline overall. Strength holds locally, numbers thin globally. Over time, the difference grows decisive, not through confrontation, but through omission. The warm ocean that once welcomed giants did not disappear. It simply stopped being wide enough to carry them everywhere they had once ruled. Whales did not change their size all at once. They changed their habits. As the ocean's patterns shifted, movement became a more valuable trait than mass alone. Lineages that once lingered within productive waters began to stretch their ranges, turning familiar routes into longer circuits that followed food as it appeared and faded. Over generations, bodies adjusted quietly to these demands, favoring streamlining, endurance, and the ability to travel far without constant feeding. Speed did not mean frantic motion. It meant efficiency across distance. Muscles refined their use of oxygen. Tails generated sustained thrust, rather than brief bursts. These whales did not outrun danger so much as outlast it, slipping through regions that once formed stable feeding grounds and now fluctuated with season and temperature. Mobility became a form of insurance, spreading risk across geography instead of concentrating it in one place. Migration patterns lengthened as a result. Some populations began traveling between feeding and breeding grounds separated by thousands of kilometers, synchronizing their movement with blooms of plankton and shifting prey densities. These journeys were not wasteful. They were calculated exchanges, trading time for reliability. By moving, whales ensured access to food even as local abundance became less predictable. For a predator built around power and proximity, this mattered. Prey that does not stay puts demands pursuit across broader spaces. Encounter rates change. Hunts become less frequent, not because prey vanishes, but because it no longer occupies the same predictable corridors. Size alone offers no solution when targets appear briefly, then disperse across open water. This shift altered the meaning of prey abundance. An ocean could still hold vast quantities of whale biomass while offering fewer opportunities to intercept it. Energy remained present, but it moved. For smaller or more flexible predators, this was manageable. Their lower costs allowed them to follow, to wait, or to adjust timing. Giants operated under stricter accounting, distance added expense before any contact occurred. Behavioral change can outpace physical change, and in whales it did. Fossil and isotopic evidence point toward increasing range, broader diets, and varied seasonal strategies. These adaptations did not make whales weaker. They made them harder to rely on as a consistent resource. What had once been large, slow-moving targets became participants in a dynamic system, responding quickly to environmental cues rather than remaining anchored to place. In this environment, the advantage shifted subtly away from sheer strength. A predator capable of enduring lean intervals and capitalizing on brief opportunities gained ground. One dependent on massive returns from fewer encounters felt the tightening first. The ocean did not announce this transition. It unfolded through timing, distance, and altered rhythms that accumulated across generations. Prey behavior, not prey size, reshaped the balance. Large whales still existed. In some regions, they even increased in number. Yet their mobility diluted accessibility. Energy was present, but unevenly distributed in time and space. For Megalodon, whose form had been shaped by an earlier, steadier world, the change did not remove its strength. It reduced the circumstances where that strength could be applied efficiently, leaving power intact but less frequently rewarded. Speed rarely announces itself in the fossil record. It leaves fewer dramatic marks than size, fewer shattered bones, fewer unmistakable signatures. Yet in a changing ocean, speed becomes visible through absence, through the quiet persistence of forms that continue while larger ones thin. As conditions shifted, the sea began to favor bodies that could move quickly, adjust often, and recover without deep cost. Smaller predators operated under a different arithmetic. Their energy needs were modest, their maintenance constant, but manageable. Warmth mattered less, distance weighed less heavily, and a missed opportunity did not echo for long. A failed hunt could be followed by another within hours or days, not weeks. Their survival was tied to frequency rather than magnitude, a rhythm easier to sustain as abundance grew uneven. Among sharks, this translated into flexibility of form and behavior. Faster species refined their movements, reducing drag, sharpening turns, and optimizing bursts of acceleration. Their bodies required less power to bring to speed and less fuel to keep moving. They could investigate new prey, abandon poor conditions, and relocate with minimal penalty. Adaptation unfolded not through dramatic change, but through small advantages compounding over time. Agility offered another quiet benefit. In a dynamic environment, the ability to change direction quickly matters as much as raw speed. Smaller sharks could respond to prey that moved unpredictably, closing distance efficiently or disengaging without consequence. They hunted opportunistically, taking advantage of moments rather than waiting for ideal conditions. This approach thrived as prey behavior grew less predictable and migrations stretched longer. Mass, by contrast, carries inertia. Turning requires effort. Accelerating demands commitment. Once in motion, a large body cannot easily abandon a chase without loss. For Megalodon, speed existed, but it arrived at a cost that smaller predators did not share. Each decision to pursue carried weight, both physical and energetic. As encounters grew less frequent, that weight accumulated. The silent advantage of agility lies in its forgiveness. It allows room for error. It tolerates experimentation. It supports survival through adjustment rather than dominance. Smaller predators did not need to win decisively every time. They needed only to remain present, to persist through fluctuation, and to exploit shifting opportunities as they appeared. Over generations, this advantage expressed itself subtly. Faster sharks expanded their ranges, diversified their diets, and endured cooling waters with fewer constraints. Their success was not dramatic, but steady. Fossils continue to appear. Lineages persist. The ocean continues to make room for them. This contrast was not a battle. There is no evidence of direct replacement or violent displacement. Instead, it reflects a redistribution of efficiency. Energy flowed toward forms that required less of it to survive. Agility aligned with an ocean that no longer promised consistency. Speed did not overpower mass, it outlasted it. As conditions tightened, the sea favored bodies that could do more with less, move lightly through change, and recover quickly from loss. In that environment, agility became its own quiet form of strength, one that asked little from the water and therefore received permission to remain. Competition does not always arrive as confrontation. Often it appears quietly, through overlap rather than invasion, through shared habits rather than open struggle. In the same oceans that still carried Megalodon's shadow, other predators refined themselves along different lines, emerging not as challengers in size, but as alternatives in efficiency. Among them were the early forms of what would later become the modern great white shark. These sharks did not mirror Megalodon's scale. They did not need to. Their bodies settled into a balance that favored versatility, combining speed, endurance, and sensory precision. They could exploit a wide range of prey, from fish to marine mammals, adjusting their targets as conditions shifted. Where Megalodon specialized in the largest rewards, these emerging predators accepted smaller returns more often, maintaining steady intake rather than waiting for singular abundance. This difference mattered as prey behavior continued to change. Whales remained present, but their movements grew longer, their appearances less predictable. Smaller marine mammals diversified as well, offering multiple feeding options across regions and seasons. Early great whites occupied this middle ground comfortably. They could pursue young whales, injured animals, seals, and large fish without committing vast energy reserves to any single hunt. Overlap followed naturally. Both predators occupied similar waters, drawn by the same general resources, yet they rarely competed directly. The ocean is large, and niches can intersect without immediate conflict. Instead of displacement, a gradual redistribution occurred. Energy that once flowed primarily toward the largest possible hunter began spreading across several capable ones. The great white's advantage lay in its flexibility. Its size allowed it to tackle substantial prey while still remaining agile enough to adapt when conditions tightened. It did not depend on a narrow band of success. It could succeed modestly, repeatedly. Each hunt carried risk, but little permanence. Failure did not linger long enough to compound. For Megalodon, this changing balance did not register as a loss of dominance in any single place. In many regions, it likely remained unmatched in power. Yet across the broader ocean, the cumulative effect mattered. Resources that once fed giants exclusively now sustained multiple predators. The surplus that absorbed inefficiency thinned as more bodies shared it. Competition without direct conflict is difficult to perceive, especially in the fossil record. There are no bite marks exchanged, no clear signs of aggression. What remains instead is timing. The continued presence of adaptable predators alongside the gradual disappearance of specialized giants speaks to a quiet sorting process, one governed by energy flow rather than violence. Early great whites did not replace Megalodon by force. They simply fit the emerging conditions more comfortably. As temperatures cooled, prey dispersed, and habitats fragmented, predators that required less certainty thrived. Their success did not announce Megalodon's decline, but it contributed to an environment where extreme size was no longer the most efficient answer. In this way, competition reshaped the ocean without spectacle. One design remained powerful, another proved easier to sustain. Over time, the sea favored the latter, not through confrontation, but through preference, allowing adaptability to spread, while specialization grew increasingly costly to maintain. Extinction is often imagined as impact, fire, or sudden silence, yet many lineages fade without spectacle, leaving no single scar to mark their passing. In the ocean, disappearance can arrive gently, carried not by violence, but by arithmetic. Lives continue, hunts still occur, teeth still break bones, and slowly, the balance that once sustained a species no longer closes. When resources tighten, pressure does not announce itself through conflict. It appears first as absence. Encounters become less frequent. Gaps stretch longer between successful hunts. Energy that once circulated freely begins to hesitate, diverted across more bodies, more paths, more demands. Nothing is taken away outright. Instead, less arrives. In this environment, extinction resembles thinning rather than collapse. Individuals survive, populations reproduce, yet fewer young reach maturity, fewer adults maintain conditions deep into life. Range contracts without notice. A species can remain formidable in appearance while losing ground numerically, year by year, generation by generation. Resource pressure works through efficiency. Predators that require less can persist where larger ones strain. This is not a matter of intelligence or intent. It is a property of design. Bodies that convert smaller meals into survival hold an advantage when abundance becomes irregular. They waste less heat. They recover faster. They endure lean stretches without crossing critical thresholds. Outcompetition in such systems rarely involves direct interaction. One predator does not need to defeat another. It only needs to arrive more often, eat adequately, and leave enough offspring behind to repeat the pattern. The less efficient form remains capable, yet finds itself failing quietly, not in strength but in continuity. For Megalodon, this meant that dominance did not guarantee persistence. Even while capable of overwhelming any rival it encountered, it depended on conditions that no longer delivered consistently. The ocean did not remove its prey. It redistributed access to it. Smaller, more adaptable hunters intercepted energy more frequently. siphoning enough to matter without ever confronting the giant directly. This process leaves little trace. Fossils do not record failed hunts or days spent searching. They preserve success far more readily than struggle. What disappears instead is density. Teeth become rarer. Gaps widen between finds. The record thins until absence becomes noticeable only in hindsight. Violence is loud. Efficiency is quiet. In ecosystems governed by flow rather than force, survival belongs to those who align best with what remains, not with what once was. Extinction, in these cases, is not defeat. It is a misalignment between a design and a changing ledger of energy. Such endings are unsettling because they lack drama. There is no final confrontation, no moment where power breaks. Life continues around the vanishing form, reshaping itself without pause. The sea accepts the change seamlessly, reallocating its resources as it always has, guided not by memory or reverence, but by balance. In this way, Megalodon could disappear without ever being killed. Its strength stayed intact. Its presence faded. The ocean did not overthrow it. It simply stopped paying the full cost of keeping it alive. A hunt begins long before pursuit. It starts with motion, with distance closed slowly through water that resists every push of muscle. For a giant, this initial commitment already carries cost. The body warms, the heart accelerates, oxygen debt begins to accumulate. Energy moves out of storage and into action, whether the chase ends in contact or dissolves into nothing. When a hunt succeeds, the exchange feels decisive. Dense tissue replaces spent reserves. Fat and protein are converted back into warmth, movement, and future attempts. The ledger closes cleanly. For a missed hunt, the entry remains open. Energy has been spent, but nothing returns to fill the space it leaves behind. For smaller predators, this gap is shallow. Their costs are lower, their recovery swift. A failed attempt can be followed by another soon after, drawing on reserves that refill easily. The system tolerates error. For giants, each miss weighs more heavily. Recovery stretches longer. The body continues to consume energy, even in stillness, drawing down stores that took time and favorable conditions to build. Missed hunts rarely arrive alone. They cluster quietly as conditions fluctuate, slight changes in prey movement, slight increases in distance, slight cooling that raises baseline demand. One failure does not break a giant. A sequence of them reshapes the margin in which survival operates. Reserves dip, then dip again, without an obvious crisis. This is how energy loss stacks, not as a sudden collapse, but as compounding subtraction. Each unsuccessful pursuit leaves the body starting the next attempt from a lower point. Muscle repair competes with digestion. Heat production competes with movement. The body prioritizes maintenance over growth, then survival over reproduction, without any outward sign that the balance has shifted. Giants bleed energy quietly. They do not starve abruptly. They think internally. The blood chemistry shifts. Recovery slows. Minor injuries linger longer. The animal remains imposing, capable, and dangerous, yet increasingly fragile in ways no predator can sense in another from a distance. The ocean amplifies this process by indifference. Water does not cushion loss. It carries heat away. It resists acceleration. It demands energy constantly. For a massive body, every kilometer traveled, every turn executed, and every pause held against buoyancy requires expenditure. When these costs accumulate without reliable return, the deficit deepens invisibly. Over time, the cost of a missed hunt is no longer isolated. It echoes forward, shaping the outcome of future attempts. Reduced speed, shorter pursuit, earlier abandonment. Each adaptation conserves energy in the moment, yet reduces the chance of success, tightening the cycle further. This quiet erosion explains how a predator can persist for long periods and then fade without drama. No injury marks the end. No single failure explains the outcome. The sum of small losses exceeds what even vast strength can absorb. Energy, once abundant, becomes the limiting factor. For Megalodon, the ocean did not remove opportunity entirely. It made the opportunity less forgiving. In that narrowing space, every missed hunt mattered more than the last, until even a giant body could no longer balance what it spent with what it gained. Long before power is tested in open water, survival is decided close to shore. In the shallows, where light reaches the seafloor and tides move gently, the youngest lives find space to grow. For Megalodon, these coastal margins carried a quiet importance. Scattered teeth, smaller in size and different in wear, appear repeatedly in sediments that once formed warm, shallow seas. Their distribution points not to random loss, but to place, to areas used again and again by the young. These coastal nurseries offered conditions the open ocean could not. Water temperatures were steadier and higher. Prey was smaller and more abundant. Depths were shallow enough to limit encounters with large predators while still allowing movement and exploration. For a juvenile shark, this balance mattered. Growth requires consistency more than spectacle. The body must accumulate tissue, refine coordination, and develop strength before the risks of deeper water can be absorbed. In these nurseries, time was the currency. Young sharks needed months and years of reliable feeding to cross the threshold into safer size. Each successful day built a margin against future uncertainty. The coastline, with its complex structure of bays, estuaries, and continental shelves, made that accumulation possible by slowing the pace of loss. As ocean conditions shifted, these spaces changed character. Cooling altered coastal temperatures first, and falling sea levels reshaped shorelines gradually but decisively. Broad, shallow zones narrowed, productive areas fragmented. What had once been extended nursery corridors became isolated pockets, separated by colder water and reduced habitat. For juveniles, this carried particular risk. Their bodies could not travel long distances efficiently. Their tolerance for cold was limited. Leaving a nursery too early increased energy demand at a stage when reserves were smallest. Remaining too long compressed competition among young sharks, thinning resources before growth was complete. Fossil patterns reflect this vulnerability indirectly. Juvenile remains become less common relative to adults as conditions tightened, suggesting increased loss before maturity, rather than sudden disappearance of breeding adults. Population pressure began quietly at the beginning of life, long before it became visible at the top. Unlike adults, young megalodon had no buffer. They could not survive extended scarcity. A missed feeding mattered immediately. Slight changes in temperature or prey density carried outsized consequences. The very environments that once sheltered them became less reliable, and there was little flexibility built into their early development. Shallow nurseries also depend on stability across generations. Adults must return repeatedly. Young must encounter the same favorable conditions that shaped those before them. When these rhythms break, recovery slows even if adults remain capable. Reproduction continues, yet fewer offspring reach the size at which the broader ocean becomes survivable. In this way, Decline can begin invisibly, embedded in early life. The ocean does not remove giants first. It reduces the number that ever become giants at all. For Megalodon, the loss of safe, warm nursery zones quietly eroded the future, thinning the population from the bottom upward while the present still appeared strong. The coastline did not disappear abruptly. It shifted, withdrawing in slow increments that reshaped the margins of the world. As more water became locked into polar ice, sea levels lowered, exposing stretches of seafloor that had long rested beneath shallow, productive seas. Bays grew narrower, shelves retreated. Warm, protected waters that once lingered close to land gave way to steeper drop-offs and colder currents. For nursery zones, this change was decisive. These environments depend on geometry as much as temperature. Shallow depth allows light to penetrate. Gentle slopes create gradients of safety where young bodies can move without sudden exposure. When sea level falls, those gradients compress. What was once a broad zone becomes a thin strip, then scattered pockets, then memory. As space shrank, density increased. Juvenile sharks clustered into fewer remaining safe areas, drawing down prey more quickly and intensifying competition. Each individual required steady intake to grow beyond vulnerability, yet the available resources now had to support more mouths in less space. Growth slowed, weakness lingered longer. The window between early life and survivable size stretched under pressure. Mortality rises most sharply in early stages of life because the margin is smallest there. Young Megalodon did not have the option to roam widely or tolerate cold exposure. Their bodies were still learning balance, speed, and efficiency. Energy reserves were shallow. A brief shortage or temperature dip could carry consequences that adults would absorb easily. Sea level change also altered the stability of these spaces across seasons. Storms reached further into newly exposed coastlines. Sediments shifted differently. Salinity fluctuated more sharply near shrinking estuaries. Conditions that had once remained predictable began to vary, sometimes subtly, sometimes enough to disrupt feeding and shelter without warning. Population stress begins quietly when fewer young survive long enough to replace those that age out of the system. Adults may remain numerous for extended periods, masking the underlying imbalance. Reproduction continues. Mating succeeds. Yet each generation produces fewer individuals that reach maturity, thinning the population from the base upward. This form of pressure does not leave dramatic traces. Fossils capture presence more easily than absence. What shifts instead is proportion. Juvenile remains become rarer relative to adults. Gaps appear where continuity once existed. The record does not show catastrophe, only attrition embedded in the earliest stages of life. Shrinking safe spaces also limits recovery. When favorable conditions return briefly, there are fewer juveniles positioned to benefit. Reduced nursery area means reduced capacity to rebound from loss. The population loses elasticity, responding more slowly to improvement and more quickly to stress. Over time, the effect compounds. Adults disappear gradually, not because they are suddenly vulnerable, but because too few are arriving to replace them. Strength remains visible. Teeth still form. Hunts still succeed, yet the foundation thins beneath the surface. In this way, extinction can be seeded at birth. The ocean does not strike the giant directly. It reshapes the places where giants begin, and by narrowing those beginnings, it quietly decides how many will ever rise to fill the open water again. Reproduction slows as bodies grow large. Time stretches between beginnings. What might be a brief cycle for smaller animals becomes a long investment when size increases, because building mass requires patience from the environment and restraint from the organism. Growth must be completed before reproduction can occur safely, and for giants, that preparation spans many years of sustained feeding and stability. In large predators, reproduction is shaped by caution rather than abundance. Gestation takes longer. Young are born fewer in number, each one carrying a greater share of the parent's total investment. Energy diverted toward reproduction cannot be used for hunting, movement, or recovery, so timing becomes critical. The body waits for conditions that feel reliable, then commits carefully, aware that mistakes carry lasting cost. Fewer offspring increase vulnerability. Losses that would be absorbed easily by a fast reproducing species become significant at extreme scale. Each juvenile matters. Each failure echoes. When early life survival declines even slightly, replacement falls behind attrition. The population continues, yet thins slowly, not through sudden collapse, but through insufficient renewal. For Megalodon, reproduction unfolded under these constraints. Its size demanded long intervals between successful breeding cycles. Recovery after each event required abundant food and stable conditions, both of which were becoming less reliable. The body could still reproduce, but doing so carried greater risk, especially as nursery environments narrowed and juvenile survival dropped. Recovery depends not only on producing young, but on producing them often enough to offset loss. Giants lack this flexibility. Their populations respond slowly to improvement and struggle to rebound after decline. When pressure builds gradually, the lag becomes dangerous. Decline continues even if conditions stabilize briefly, because there are not enough new individuals moving upward to restore balance. This delay creates an illusion of security. Adults remain visible for long periods. The species appears stable. Strength still defines encounters. Yet beneath that surface, age structure shifts. Older individuals dominate. Younger cohorts grow smaller. The future thins, while the present still holds. Reproductive limitation also reduces adaptability. Fewer generations pass over the same span of time, slowing evolutionary response to new conditions. Traits that favor efficiency or flexibility spread more slowly, if they spread at all. The body that once fit its world perfectly now carries a design refined for stability rather than change. As environmental pressure accumulates, reproduction becomes a bottleneck rather than a solution. Even when food is found and hunts succeed, the long rhythm of replacement cannot accelerate to meet loss. Time itself becomes the limiting factor, and size stretches time unevenly. In this way, extreme scale turns reproduction into a fragile bridge between past success and future survival. When that bridge narrows, recovery grows difficult without ever appearing impossible. The ocean does not forbid giants from continuing. It simply requires more patience than the system can afford to give, and over enough generations, the gap becomes permanent. Extinction does not always arrive as an ending. Sometimes it moves through time so slowly that it never feels like an event at all. Life continues to circle itself. Generations overlap. Teeth still fall into sediment. The ocean remains busy and full. What changes is proportion, a subtle easing away that only becomes clear when viewed across immense spans. For Megalodon, decline unfolded within continuity. There was no single moment where the world tipped and the species vanished. Instead, numbers thinned almost imperceptibly. Individuals lived long lives. Populations persisted across broad regions, yet each cycle left fewer behind. The difference between replacement and loss remained small, but it remained consistent. Over millions of years, this imbalance accumulated. A missed generation here, reduced juvenile survival there, longer gaps between successful reproduction. None of these forces would be enough alone. Together, they formed a slow erosion that never announced itself as danger. The ocean did not empty. Prey did not disappear. Conditions shifted gradually, always just within the range that allowed survival to continue. This kind of extinction leaves no sharp boundary in the fossil record. There is no line where abundance becomes absent overnight. Instead, remains grow rarer, spaced farther apart. The record stretches thin until the pattern can only be recognized in hindsight. What seems sudden, when compressed into human time, was, in reality, a long, quiet release. Such a process is unsettling because it lacks drama. It denies the comfort of catastrophe. There is no villain, no disaster to blame, no clear mistake to point toward. Megalodon did not fail to adapt because adaptation was impossible. Its design remained functional, powerful, and effective. What failed was the balance between what the ocean offered and what that design required. Gradual decline also hides within success. A species can dominate its encounters while losing its future. Strength persists locally, even as numbers diminish globally. Presence remains convincing long after persistence has weakened. For observers limited to short windows of time, extinction appears unlikely until it has already occurred. In this way, Megalodon's story resists the familiar narratives of loss. It does not center on a moment of defeat. It unfolds through patience, through endurance stretched slightly too far. The ocean simply adjusted its flows, and the margins narrowed until the giant no longer fit comfortably within them. The unsettling nature of this ending lies in its restraint. The world did not need to change dramatically to erase one of its most formidable forms. It only needed to change enough to make continuation slightly harder than replacement. Over millions of years, that difference proved sufficient. Megalodon disappeared without noise, without violence, without spectacle. The sea carried on, redistributing energy, supporting other shapes and other strategies. Nothing marked the passing at the time. Only later, through absence, did the story emerge, revealing that extinction does not always roar. Sometimes it drifts, quiet and unnoticed, until even legends become gaps in stone. Survival in the ocean often belongs to those who ask less of it. Smaller sharks carried bodies that moved through water with modest demand, drawing only what was needed to remain balanced and alert. Their muscles required less fuel to sustain motion. Their internal temperatures adjusted more easily to cooling water. Even at rest, their energy loss remained manageable, allowing them to persist through fluctuations that strained larger forms. Lower energy needs shaped behavior as well as physiology. These sharks could afford to hunt more frequently with smaller returns. A single fish, a scattered school, or an opportunistic strike was enough to restore what had been spent. They did not require rare, high-value encounters to remain stable. Their survival was built from accumulation rather than windfall. This flexibility expanded prey options naturally. Smaller sharks fed across trophic levels, shifting between fish, cephalopods, carrion, and smaller marine mammals as availability changed. They adapted not by redesigning their bodies, but by adjusting their focus. Diet diversity became a buffer against instability. When one food source thinned, another often remained within reach. Broader prey options also shortened response time. These sharks did not need to wait for ideal conditions. They could exploit brief surges of abundance, local events, or seasonal pulses without committing vast resources. Each successful feeding reduced pressure immediately, preventing deficits from stacking. Geographic flexibility reinforced this resilience. Smaller bodies moved more easily across thermal boundaries. They could tolerate cooler water for longer periods without excessive cost, allowing them to follow prey into regions that larger predators avoided. As the ocean became more variable, this mobility widened rather than narrowed their range. Movement did not require precision planning. These sharks could explore new areas, retreat from poor conditions, and return without suffering severe energetic penalties. Their distributions expanded and overlapped, creating continuity even as habitats shifted. When one region cooled or changed productivity, another often remained accessible. Over time, this adaptability compounded. Populations remained connected rather than isolated. Reproductive cycles continued steadily. Juveniles encountered survivable conditions across broader areas, increasing the likelihood that enough would reach maturity. The system absorbed losses without magnifying them. None of this granted dominance in the traditional sense. Smaller sharks rarely occupied the absolute top of the food web. Yet they endured, not through power, but through alignment with an ocean that increasingly rewarded efficiency. Their design asked less of the sea, and in return, the sea continued to support them. This contrast clarifies why survival did not require replacing giants with something greater. It required persistence through change. Smaller sharks carried forms that matched an environment no longer willing to subsidize excess. Their continued presence reflects compatibility rather than conquest. In the quiet arithmetic of the ocean, energy saved becomes opportunity extended. Lower needs, broader diets, and flexible movement combined into a strategy that remained viable as conditions tightened. While giants faded through accumulation of cost, smaller sharks endured by staying light enough to move with the current rather than against it. Perfection in nature is always local. It forms inside a moment, shaped by the pressures that exist right now, not the ones that may arrive later. Evolution works without foresight, refining bodies to solve present demands with increasing precision. When conditions hold steady, this process produces forms that appear inevitable, as though they were meant to exist exactly as they are. Megalodon emerged from such refinement, its body aligned tightly with the ocean that produced it. Size answered abundance, power answered large, slow prey, warmth softened metabolic cost. Each generation reinforced the same successful traits, sharpening them rather than broadening them. Over time, the design approached an optimum, a configuration that performed extraordinarily well within a specific set of conditions. Specialization brings efficiency. It removes redundancy. It trades flexibility for performance. In stable environments, this trade feels safe. Energy flows reliably. Challenges repeat themselves. The body becomes tuned not for possibility, but for certainty. For Megalodon, this tuning delivered dominance without compromise for millions of years. Yet adaptability lives in unused space. It requires traits that are not always optimal, behaviors that may seem inefficient when conditions are favorable. Flexibility costs energy in the short term, but preserves options over time. When the environment shifts, even subtly, those options become decisive. As the ocean changed, Megalodon's perfection revealed its limits. The traits that once minimized effort now reduced maneuverability. The reliance on large, concentrated prey narrowed response to movement and dispersal. Warm water preference, constrained range. Slow reproduction, limited recovery. None of these traits were flaws. They were refinements carried too far to pivot easily. Optimization creates dependency. A body shaped precisely for one context begins to require that context to function fully. When that support weakens, the design remains impressive yet increasingly fragile. Performance stays high where conditions align, but survival across varied conditions becomes harder to sustain. This is how being perfectly adapted can become a problem. The organism does not fail to respond, it responds exactly as it was shaped to respond, even when the response no longer fits. Evolution cannot reverse direction quickly. It works through small adjustments across generations, and for giants, those generations pass slowly. Megalodon did not lack adaptability because it was unsuccessful. It lacked adaptability because it had been too successful for too long. The ocean rewarded its specialization generously, leaving little pressure to explore alternative strategies. When that reward system changed, the cost of perfection became visible. In this light, Megalodon's extinction is not a story of error. It is a story of alignment carried past its usefulness. The design was never wrong. It was simply complete within a world that no longer existed. Nature does not preserve forms because they are impressive. It preserves those that remain compatible with changing conditions. Perfection, once achieved, leaves little room to bend. When the environment asks for something different, even the most optimized designs can find themselves outpaced by more adaptable ones, not through failure, but through precision that can no longer shift. After Megalodon's presence thinned and then vanished, the ocean did not pause. Currents continued their long routes. Plankton bloomed and faded. Whales followed food across expanding distances. The sea absorbed the change without ceremony, adjusting its internal rhythms as it always has, redistributing energy into forms that remained compatible with the conditions at hand. Marine ecosystems are not structured around single bodies, no matter how dominant they appear. They are networks of flow, linking sunlight to phytoplankton, plankton to fish, fish to larger hunters, and waste back into circulation. When one conduit narrows, others widen. Energy seeks paths of least resistance, filling niches that remain open rather than preserving those that have grown costly. With the disappearance of the largest apex hunter, predation did not cease. Pressure reorganized instead. Smaller sharks, toothed whales, and other marine predators absorbed portions of what Megalodon once controlled. No single species replaced it fully. The hierarchy flattened. Multiple hunters shared influence rather than one towering above the rest. These new predator structures favored balance over spectacle. Energy flowed through more frequent, smaller transfers rather than occasional massive exchanges. This suited an ocean that had grown less forgiving of inefficiency. Smaller kills meant faster turnover. Shorter hunts meant quicker recovery. The system became more distributed, less reliant on extremes. Over time, this reshaping reinforced itself. Predators that fit the new balance persisted and diversified. Those that asked too much faded. The absence of Megalodon did not create chaos, it reduced strain. The ecosystem settled into a configuration that matched available temperature, prey behavior, and geographic structure more closely than before. The fossil record reflects this transition quietly. Teeth of other sharks remain common. Bones of marine mammals continue to appear. Diversity increases in some lineages. The ocean does not record regret. It records continuity. Life moves toward arrangements that maintain flow rather than preserve legacy. Nature does not measure success by longevity alone. It measures by compatibility with present conditions. When circumstances change, even slightly, energy shifts toward designs that convert it most efficiently. This redistribution is not a judgment. It is a process as steady as circulation itself. In this way, Megalodon's absence became part of the ocean's ongoing adjustment, its role dissolved into smaller pieces, carried forward by many rather than one. Power dispersed, influence spread. The system grew quieter, more complex, less dependent on singular dominance. The reshaped ocean still supported large predators, still carried danger, and still reflected ancient lineages. Yet it no longer paid the premium required to sustain the largest hunter ever produced. The sea did not remove the giant deliberately. It simply continued adapting, aligning energy with forms that could persist under tightening constraints. What remains is not an empty throne, but a different arrangement. The ocean learned, as it always does, how to move on. There is no final scene to mark the end, no last stand, no unmistakable horizon where Megalodon vanishes from the water and is never seen again. Its story does not conclude with violence or spectacle. It concludes the way many long stories do, by gradually losing detail until only gaps remain. In the fossil record, disappearance is rarely sharp. Teeth do not stop appearing abruptly, they think. Layers that once held frequent traces begin to yield fewer finds. Sediment accumulates quietly above older remains, carrying on its ordinary work while the record grows sparse. What had been common becomes occasional. What was occasional becomes rare. Eventually, the pattern is recognized not by presence, but by its absence. This kind of ending resists narrative instinct. There is no dramatic peak, no moment to point toward as the cause. Time stretches unevenly, compressing millions of years into a few centimeters of rock. Within that compression, the loss feels sudden. In reality, it unfolded gradually, embedded within continuity rather than rupture. No sudden disappearance means no clear signal for the ecosystem itself. Predators did not suddenly lose prey. Whales did not suddenly move differently. The ocean did not register a moment of shock. Life adjusted step by step, absorbing each incremental change as part of normal variation. From within the system, there was never a day when Megalodon was present and then gone. The absence becomes visible only later when comparisons are made across layers and regions. A tooth expected does not appear. Another layer yields none. The pattern repeats. What emerges is not an ending, but a quiet conclusion drawn from missing data rather than dramatic evidence. This lack of a final moment makes the story unsettling. It suggests that even the most formidable forms can pass out of existence without resistance or notice. Strength does not guarantee memory. Dominance does not secure permanence. A species can fade while still fully functional, leaving behind no sign of struggle, only fewer traces with each passing interval. Just absence in the fossil record carries its own weight. It forces interpretation rather than observation. Scientists must infer loss rather than witness it. The silence becomes part of the evidence. Where teeth once appeared across oceans, they stop. The seafloor continues to collect remains from other species, reinforcing the reality that the system moved on without disruption. In this way, Megalodon's ending feels almost incomplete. There is no closure, only cessation. The narrative trails off, not because something dramatic occurred, but because nothing did. Life persisted around it. Conditions continued changing. The ledger stopped balancing, and eventually there was nothing left to record. Such endings challenge the way extinction is imagined. They remind us that loss does not require force or catastrophe. It can arrive as subtraction without announcement, slipping beneath the scale of attention until it becomes history rather than event. Megalodon did not fall. It was not defeated. It simply ceased to appear, leaving the ocean to carry on its endless work, layer by layer, quietly sealing the space where a giant once moved. Stone records what survives long enough to be buried. Everything else passes without mark. Fossils are remnants of unusual persistence, not a full archive of life as it unfolded. Between preserved moments lie vast stretches of time where motion, struggle, and loss leave no direct trace. The history recovered from rock is therefore incomplete by design, shaped as much by absence as by presence. What fossils cannot show is continuity. They do not reveal how often a hunt failed, how long a body searched without finding food, or how populations thinned gradually across wide regions. They preserve success far more readily than decline. Teeth fall, bones settle, and sediment seals them only when conditions align. Countless lives pass between those moments without leaving anything behind. Because of this, extinction is rarely observed directly in the fossil record. It is inferred. Scientists notice patterns across layers, across coastlines, across time. A species appears regularly, then less often, then not at all. Other organisms continue to leave traces in the same sediments, confirming that preservation itself has not failed. The environment remains readable. Only the subject grows silent. Inference relies on comparison rather than single finds. When a lineage disappears simultaneously from many regions, across different environments, the conclusion strengthens. The absence is not local, it is systemic. When closely related species persist while one fades, the signal sharpens further. The rock does not announce extinction, but it allows it to be recognized through consistency. What fossils also cannot show is the pace of experience. Millions of years compress into layers thin enough to fit between fingertips. Gradual decline becomes visually abrupt when scaled this way. A slow thinning of populations appears as a sudden cutoff, even though life within that span unfolded at its own steady rhythm. Absence tells its story quietly. When expected evidence fails to appear repeatedly, it becomes meaningful. Silence accumulates weight. Over time, that silence forms a boundary more convincing than any single dramatic find. The lack of megalodon remains above certain layers, speaks not of preservation bias alone, but of a real change in what the ocean carried forward. This method of knowing demands restraint. It accepts uncertainty without abandoning clarity. Scientists do not claim to see the final days of a species. They trace its waning footprint until it no longer crosses the page. In doing so, they respect the difference between what the record contains and what must be reconstructed from pattern. The story that emerges from absence is one of process rather than event. It suggests that extinction can unfold without leaving scars, without marking a singular end. Life does not always conclude with punctuation. Sometimes it trails off, line by line, until nothing more is written. In this way, fossils teach by omission. They reveal not only what endured, but what the world could no longer sustain. The missing teeth, the empty layers, and the continued presence of other life combine into a narrative that does not rely on spectacle. What fossils cannot show directly, they imply through consistency. The ocean moved on. The stone remembers only fragments. Between them lies a story told in silence, where disappearance becomes legible not through what remains, but through what no longer arrives. Longevity can create a kind of blindness. When a species persists for millions of years, Surviving shifts that erase others, its continued presence begins to feel guaranteed. The environment appears predictable because it has been navigated successfully for so long. Strength becomes familiar. Stability settles in, not as a warning, but as reassurance. For much of its existence, Megalodon lived within this reassurance. It endured changes that ended other predators. Oceans rose and fell. Prey diversified. Temperatures fluctuated within tolerable bounds. Through it all, the giant remained. Each successful generation reinforced the sense that its design was not merely effective, but complete. This long survival masked vulnerability rather than removing it. Adaptation slowed not because it was unnecessary in principle, but because immediate pressure remained low. When dominance consistently yields success, there is little incentive for change. Traits that once provided advantage become entrenched, repeated faithfully rather than questioned by selection. Dominance shapes behavior as well as form. A predator that rarely faces scarcity or competition can afford to be conservative. It hunts the same way, it reproduces on the same schedule, it occupies the same ranges. These patterns harden into identity. Over time, flexibility fades quietly, not because it is selected against, but because it is no longer selected for. This is the danger of stability. Environments that change slowly do not announce their turning points. Pressure accumulates beneath the surface, absorbed at first by surplus. As long as resources arrive reliably, inefficiencies remain hidden. The system appears robust, even as margins are thin. For Megalodon, extended dominance delayed meaningful adjustment. The traits that defined its success continued to function well enough that no alternative strategies gained ground. Size still delivered an advantage. Power still secured meals. Warm water still offered comfort. The ocean rewarded consistency even as it drifted toward new conditions. When change finally crossed a threshold, it did so without spectacle. The shift was not abrupt enough to trigger rapid adaptation, yet persistent enough to matter. The long history of success became a liability, anchoring the species to patterns that no longer fit as well as they once had. Invincibility is an illusion built from continuity. It emerges when survival stretches across timescales too large to perceive gradual change. The absence of immediate threat creates confidence, and confidence slows response. By the time the mismatch becomes apparent, the capacity to adjust has already narrowed. This illusion does not imply weakness. It arises precisely because a species has been strong for so long. The traits that secured its position also reduced its urgency to explore alternatives. Stability rewarded sameness, and sameness reduced resilience. In nature, survival does not favor those who appear untouchable. It favors those who remain responsive. Long dominance can dull that responsiveness, turning success into inertia. For Megalodon, invincibility did not break suddenly. It wore away quietly, concealed beneath a history that seemed to promise permanence, until stability itself became the most dangerous condition of all. Gigantism begins as an advantage earned through abundance. When resources are plentiful and competition is loose, bodies grow larger because the environment allows it. Size unlocks reach, strength, and presence. It reduces the number of threats and expands control over space. In such conditions, growing bigger is not excess. It is alignment with opportunity. The benefits are immediate. Large predators dominate encounters, secure larger meals, and deter rivals through scale alone. Their size grants access to prey unavailable to smaller hunters and provides buffers against short interruptions in supply. In warm, stable oceans. Gigantism becomes a shortcut to efficiency, converting plentiful energy into overwhelming force with little penalty. Over time, however, benefits mature into obligations. Large bodies demand continuous investment. Tissue must be maintained. Heat must be regulated. Movement carries weight, whether prey appears or not. These costs persist through calm and scarcity alike. What once felt like a margin becomes a fixed expense written permanently into biology. Long-term costs emerge quietly. Size reduces tolerance for variation. It limits the range of conditions a body can occupy comfortably. Cooling water increases metabolic demand. Fragmented habitats stretch travel distances. Shifting prey behavior disrupts timing. Each change alone feels manageable, yet together they narrow the space where large forms remain sustainable. The problem is not size itself, but commitment. Gigantic bodies cannot downsize in response to pressure. They are built to operate within specific parameters and require the environment to continue honoring that agreement. When the world changes, the body does not negotiate easily. It continues to ask for the same return even as the system offers less. Recovery also slows. Large animals reproduce more cautiously and less frequently. Population turnover stretches across longer spans. When losses occur, replacement lags behind. The system loses elasticity. Improvement arrives slowly. Decline arrives quietly, carried forward by time rather than events. This dynamic explains why giants rarely last forever. They thrive during windows when energy flows generously and predictably. When those windows close, even partially, size transforms from strength into burden. Smaller forms adapt more readily because they ask less of their surroundings. They bend. Giants resist. History shows this pattern repeatedly. Across land and sea, enormous predators appear during periods of abundance, then fade as conditions shift. Their disappearance does not imply failure. It reflects a mismatch between scale and circumstance. The environment evolves faster than large bodies can follow. For Megalodon, gigantism was never a mistake at its origin. It was a perfect response to a particular ocean. Over millions of years, that ocean changed its terms. Warmth retreated, prey dispersed. Efficiency began to matter more than spectacle. The cost of size grew heavier as the system tightened around it. In this light, size becomes a long-term liability, not because it lacks power, but because it depends on continuity. Giants persist only as long as the world remains generous. When generosity thins, even slightly, the arithmetic shifts. What once delivered dominance begins to demand more than the environment can provide, and time carries the rest away without resistance. Across Earth's history, Megalodon's story is not isolated. It sits within a longer pattern written repeatedly into the fossil record, where enormous predators rise during periods of abundance and quietly disappear as conditions shift. These losses are spread across eras and environments, yet they share a recognizable shape. On land, giant carnivorous mammals once dominated open plains, supported by rich ecosystems and vast herds. Over time, many of these hunters vanished, not because prey disappeared entirely, but because landscapes fractured, climates cooled, and efficiency began to outweigh brute force. Large bodies that once ruled through strength became difficult to sustain when energy arrived less reliably. In the seas, other massive predators followed similar arcs. Enormous marine reptiles flourished in warm, shallow oceans during earlier ages, filling roles that no longer exist today. As temperatures changed and coastlines shifted, these forms faded, replaced by smaller, more flexible hunters. The ocean did not lose predation. It redistributed it into shapes that could persist under new constraints. These disappearances rarely align with sudden catastrophe. Instead, they unfold gradually, marked by thinning presence rather than dramatic collapse. The pressures involved repeat with remarkable consistency. Cooling climates raise metabolic cost. Habitat fragmentation reduces safe spaces. Prey behavior changes, favoring mobility and dispersion. Reproduction slows relative to loss. None of these forces are fatal alone, yet together they erode viability at scale. What unites these stories is not weakness, but specialization. Large predators become exquisitely tuned to particular conditions. When those conditions persist, dominance feels permanent. When they drift, even slightly, specialization turns into dependency. The traits that once delivered advantage narrow the range of survivable outcomes. Evolutionary themes echo across these patterns. Abundance encourages size. Size demands stability. Stability delays adaptation. Change arrives gradually. Efficiency gains ground. Giants recede. Smaller forms endure, not through superiority, but through tolerance for variation. This cycle does not imply error in becoming large. Gigantism emerges because it works, sometimes for millions of years. The problem arises when the environment that rewards it proves temporary. Evolution refines for the present, not the future. Long success does not guarantee longevity. Seen this way, Megalodon becomes part of a broader rhythm rather than an anomaly. Its extinction reflects the same logic that reshaped ecosystems repeatedly before and after its time. Energy flows toward forms that best match current conditions, and when those conditions change, the flow shifts again. The repetition of this pattern lends it quiet authority. It suggests that the fate of giants is less about individual circumstance and more about structural limits. Extreme size magnifies both advantage and cost. When advantage fades, cost remains. Megalodon's story resonates because it feels familiar beyond its scale. It reminds us that dominance is temporary, that success can conceal fragility, and that evolution favors designs that remain compatible with change. The ocean has told this story many times. Megalodon is one of its most dramatic verses, but not its last. The modern ocean carries echoes of its past within living bodies that still move through it. Whales migrate across vast distances, balancing enormous size with efficient movement and carefully timed feeding. Sharks patrol a wide range of depths and temperatures, occupying roles shaped by millions of years of adjustment. These animals are not relics. They are current solutions to present conditions, refined within an ocean that continues to change. Today's whales reflect a careful balance between scale and efficiency. Their bodies are large, yet their diets, movements, and reproductive strategies align tightly with modern energy flow. Migration allows them to track productivity across hemispheres. Feeding strategies concentrate effort during brief periods of abundance. Long intervals of fasting are supported by physiology built for endurance rather than constant consumption. Modern sharks display a similar alignment. Most apex species are smaller than ancient giants, yet highly effective within their roles. Their success rests on adaptability. Broad diets, flexible ranges, and efficient movement allow them to persist through warming waters, shifting prey distributions, and human pressure. They do not dominate through overwhelming force alone. They persist by staying compatible with what the ocean can offer now. Energy balance remains the central constraint. The modern sea is productive, but unevenly so. Climate change alters currents and temperature gradients. Overfishing redistributes biomass. Coastal habitats shrink or shift. In this environment, survival favors designs that can absorb variability without collapse. The lesson embedded in Megalodon's story remains active, not historical. Large size still carries benefits, but those benefits must be paid for continuously. When the cost rises faster than the return, even the strongest forms strain. Modern giants manage this balance through migration, cooperation, and efficiency refined over long spans. Smaller predators manage it through flexibility and lower demand. Both strategies work as long as they remain aligned with energy flow. This story matters because the pressures that shaped the past are accelerating in the present. Temperature shifts occur faster. Habitat change unfolds within decades rather than millennia. Energy redistribution happens rapidly under human influence. Species that cannot adjust their balance quickly face the same quiet risks that once narrowed the margins for ancient giants. Megalodon's disappearance was not a warning written for its own time alone. It illustrates a principle that continues to govern the ocean. Dominance does not guarantee durability. Strength must remain affordable. Design must match circumstances. When mismatch grows, decline can begin invisibly, even while power remains impressive. Understanding this pattern reframes conservation and observation. Protecting modern oceans is not about preserving legends or restoring past hierarchies. It is about maintaining the conditions that allow life to balance cost with return. Productivity, connectivity, and stability matter more than spectacle. The sea still redistributes energy according to the same quiet logic. It rewards forms that fit its present shape and withdraws support from those that no longer do. Megalodon's absence reminds us that the ocean does not promise permanence. It offers opportunity, adjusted continually to circumstance. In the movements of modern whales and sharks, the lesson endures. Survival belongs not to the most powerful design ever produced, but to those that remain in conversation with a changing world, able to move, adapt, and persist within the limits the ocean sets today. Extinction is often mistaken for collapse, as if it requires weakness or a decisive mistake. Yet many lineages vanish without ever losing their ability to survive within the world they were shaped for. Their bodies remain effective. Their behavior continues to function. What changes instead is context, the quiet framework that determines whether strength can still be supported. For Megalodon, extinction did not arrive as failure. Its form never stopped working. Teeth are still cut, muscles still drove motion, its senses still interpreted the sea with precision. Within familiar conditions, the animal remained entirely capable. What slipped away was not competence, but compatibility. Survival is always dependent on circumstance. A design succeeds only so long as the environment continues to reward it. When that reward structure shifts, even subtly, success can erode without drama. Traits that once returned surplus begin to return balance, then deficit. The organism does not break. The ledger simply stops closing. This reframing changes how extinction is understood. Rather than punishment for inadequacy, it becomes a natural consequence of shifting alignment. Life is not graded on absolute strength or perfection. It persists through match, through fit, through the ongoing agreement between form and environment. When that agreement dissolves, persistence fades regardless of past success. Strength without sustainability cannot carry itself indefinitely. Power demands fuel. Size demands space. Specialization demands stability. When those demands exceed what the world supplies, extinction follows not as an ending, but as release. The organism exits the system because the system no longer supports its costs. This perspective removes judgment from loss. Megalodon did not lose because it failed to adapt fast enough. It is lost because adaptation at its scale unfolds slowly, while the environment continues adjusting. Time itself became misaligned. Each generation arrived into conditions just slightly less favorable than the last, until replacement could not keep pace with attrition. Seen this way, extinction becomes an ecological correction rather than a narrative defeat. The ocean redistributed energy toward forms that could operate within new constraints. Smaller bodies, broader diets, and flexible ranges fit better. The system adjusted without hostility, guided by balance rather than memory. This does not diminish the animal that vanished. It clarifies its place. Megalodon represents a moment when the ocean could afford extreme power. Its disappearance marks the closing of that moment, not the exposure of a flaw. The same forces that enabled its rise shaped its departure. Understanding extinction without failure also shifts how modern ecosystems are viewed. Survival today does not guarantee survival tomorrow. Dominance offers no protection if underlying conditions drift. Strength must remain affordable. Success must remain renewable. Megalodon's story endures because it reminds us that existence is conditional. Life persists, not through permanence, but through continued fit. When that fit fades, even the most formidable forms can step quietly out of history, leaving behind not evidence of collapse, but proof that sustainability, not strength, decides who remains. Energy moves through the ocean with quiet discipline. It enters through sunlight and nutrients, circulates through plankton and small fish, and climbs toward larger bodies only when enough surplus exists to sustain them. Every ecosystem operates within a budget. Nothing exceeds it for long. During Megalodon's time, that budget was generous. Warm waters expanded productive zones. Shallow seas multiplied feeding grounds. Large whales converted abundant biomass into concentrated energy, making extreme predation affordable. The ocean could pay the cost of a giant because enough value flowed upward to support it. As conditions shifted, that balance tightened. Cooling waters altered circulation patterns. Productivity became more uneven across regions. Prey traveled farther and fed more selectively. Energy still flowed, but less predictably, less densely. What once moved easily toward giants now spread across wider networks of smaller consumers. Nature does not preserve roles out of loyalty. It reallocates resources according to efficiency. When energy yields diminish at one level, it is redirected elsewhere. Smaller predators convert scattered prey into survivable gains more reliably. Flexible species occupy changing niches with less waste. The system follows return, not legacy. For Megalodon, the cost remained fixed while returns declined. Large bodies require constant intake regardless of shifting supply. Missed opportunities matter more. Long travel demands more fuel. Each adjustment compounds expenditure without guaranteeing reward. The ocean did not remove the giant, it simply stopped subsidizing it. This reallocation is not abrupt. It unfolds gradually, guided by countless individual outcomes. A successful hunt here, a failed migration there, juveniles that do not survive, adults that reproduce less often. Over time, math becomes unavoidable. Energy no longer accumulates where it once did. The quiet logic of life mirrors economics without intent. Systems stabilize by favoring paths of least loss. When too much energy is required to maintain a role, that role fades, not because it is unfit in isolation, but because the system benefits more by distributing energy across forms that demand less. This logic governs all ecosystems. Forests do not hold space for giants when soil's thin. Grasslands do not support massive grazers when rainfall falters. Oceans are no different. They reward alignment between cost and flow. When alignment breaks, they adjust without hesitation. Megalodon's disappearance reflects this principle clearly. The ocean did not collapse. Prey did not vanish. Other predators thrived. Energy continued to circulate, simply along different routes. What ended was not predation, but the feasibility of extreme scale within the new budget. Understanding this reframes extinction as an accounting outcome rather than a dramatic event. The ocean kept balancing its ledger. It shifted investment toward designs that matched current supply. The giant, once profitable, became unsustainable. In this way, the ocean no longer paying the cost was neither error nor choice. It was a consequence. Energy follows efficiency. Life persists where balance holds. When it does not, the system moves on quietly, leaving behind absence where once there was dominance and continuity everywhere else. When scientists describe Megalodon as becoming too expensive, the language can sound misleading. No currency was lost. No single misstep tipped the balance. The cost was measured entirely in energy, the fundamental currency that governs every living system. Energy is gathered, stored, spent, and lost, and survival depends on keeping that exchange within workable limits. In Megalodon's world, energy once arrived in abundance. Large prey delivered massive returns. Warm water reduces metabolic strain. Shallow seas shorten travel between feeding grounds and nursery zones. Under these conditions, extreme size was not reckless. It was efficient. The energy required to build and maintain a giant body was reliably repaid by the environment. As conditions shifted, the exchange changed. Each hunt demanded more effort. Prey moved farther, migrated more frequently, and became harder to intercept. Cooling water raises baseline energy needs. Long-distance movement consumed more fuel. None of these changes were dramatic alone. Together, they altered the balance sheet. Calling this expensive does not imply error. Megalodon did not choose poorly. Its design represented a trade-off, one that exchanged flexibility for dominance. Massive size delivered unparalleled power, but narrowed the range of conditions under which that power remained affordable. The trade-off functioned beautifully until the environment no longer supported it as generously. This is the nature of evolutionary exchange. Every adaptation solves a problem by accepting limits elsewhere. Speed trades endurance. Armor trades agility. Size trades efficiency for reach and force. These exchanges are not mistakes. They are agreements with the present environment, signed without knowledge of the future. The imbalance that emerged was subtle. Energy still entered the system. Megalodon still hunted successfully. Yet over time, expenditure crept closer to intake. Margins thinned. What had once been surplus became a precise balance. When balance became deficit, the system could no longer recover quickly enough to sustain population size. No weakness caused this outcome. Megalodon remained powerful to the end of its lineage. Its bite did not soften. Its presence did not fade gradually through frailty. Instead, the environment's ability to support that power declined. Strength stayed constant, while affordability did not. This distinction matters. Weakness implies failure of the organism. Imbalance reflects change in the surrounding system. Megalodon was not defeated. It was outpaced by shifting conditions that favored different exchanges, ones that traded raw power for efficiency, flexibility, and lower daily cost. In this sense, too expensive describes a mismatch rather than a flaw. The ocean continued to operate, redistributing energy toward forms that could survive on narrower margins. Smaller predators required less input. Flexible hunters adapted routes and prey choices. The budget tightened, and spending shifted accordingly. Megalodon's disappearance becomes understandable within this frame. It was not rejected by nature. It simply no longer fits within the energy economy that emerged. The ledger did not accuse, it was adjusted. Too expensive means the balance no longer holds, and life, guided by quiet arithmetic, moves on. The final generations lived within a narrowing world. The ocean remained vast, yet opportunity thinned across it, stretched into longer distances and shorter windows. What had once been familiar routes no longer delivered the same returns. The sea did not empty, but abundance became scattered, uneven, and harder to gather into a single life. Scarcity first appeared as a delay. Hunts took longer to complete. Prey arrived later in the season or passed through regions more quickly. Encounters grew less frequent, not absent, just less reliable. Each individual could still succeed, yet success demanded more time, more movement, more energy spent searching between rewards. Movement expanded outward. Migrations lengthened as productive zones shifted toward cooler latitudes. Travel that once connected, feeding and breeding grounds, efficiently now consumed larger portions of the year. Distance became a silent pressure, stretching effort across wider ranges and leaving less margin for rest, recovery, and growth. Longer journeys carry cumulative cost. Energy invested in movement cannot be reclaimed. Every extension reduces reserves available for reproduction and survival. Over time, this redistribution reshaped population dynamics. Adults remained formidable, but fewer reached maturity. Juveniles faced longer odds before they could access the resources needed to survive. Success rates declined without spectacle. Failed hunts accumulated quietly. A missed opportunity meant more than hunger. It altered timing, reduced stamina, and limited future effort. When these misses stacked across seasons, recovery slowed. Even strong individuals struggled to regain balance once it slipped away. Reproduction reflected this strain. Fewer offspring were carried forward successfully. Gestation and early survival demanded stable conditions that no longer appeared consistently. Nursery zones remained, yet they were less predictable, exposed to shifting currents and changing coastlines. Each generation entered an environment slightly less forgiving than the one before it. The population did not collapse at once, it thinned. Numbers declined unevenly across regions, leaving gaps between survivors. Encounters became rarer, reducing genetic exchange and slowing recovery further. What had once been a continuous presence fragmented into scattered remnants. These final generations did not experience defeat in a dramatic sense. They lived fully within their time. They hunted, migrated, and reproduced as their ancestors had. What changed was not behavior, but return. Effort increasingly outweighed reward. The ocean offered fewer moments where scale paid off. Eventually, continuity broke. One generation failed to replace itself completely. Then another followed. The process did not announce itself. It unfolded across centuries, carried by arithmetic rather than conflict. Strength persisted, yet opportunity receded. In the end, the last generations were shaped by endurance rather than dominance. They represent the final phase of a lineage that had once matched its world perfectly. As conditions shifted, they adapted as far as their design allowed, pushing farther, moving longer, surviving thinner margins. Their passing left no clear boundary in the sea, only absence where presence once accumulated. The ocean continued its rhythm, populated by forms that fit its new shape. The last generations faded, not in failure, but in quiet persistence, carried forward until persistence itself could no longer be sustained. The remains Megalodon left behind are sparse, yet precise. Teeth scattered across ancient coastlines carry more information than their size suggests. They record diet, growth, movement, and timing. They place a giant within specific waters at specific moments. Through them, scientists trace not a single dramatic ending, but a long presence followed by absence. From these fragments emerges insight into how ecosystems support extreme forms. Megalodon demonstrates how abundance can allow size to escalate beyond what later conditions can maintain. Its history clarifies the relationship between temperature, productivity, and scale in marine systems. Warmth expands possibilities, cooling narrows it. Teeth embedded in sediment mark where and when those shifts occurred. The fossil record also reveals how extinction unfolds without spectacle. There is no boundary layer announcing collapse. Instead, teeth simply stop appearing above certain strata. Other species continue uninterrupted. The signal is clean precisely because it is quiet. It shows that disappearance can be orderly, governed by gradual change rather than catastrophe. This offers evolutionary caution. Success that lasts millions of years can still contain hidden limits. Adaptations optimized for one world may struggle in another, even when change unfolds slowly. Megalodon warns against assuming that long survival guarantees future security. Evolution rewards fit, not legacy. The warning is not one of fragility, but of trade-off. Megalodon's design excelled at converting large prey into dominance. That same design carried fixed costs that became harder to meet as conditions shifted. The teeth remind us that every advantage is paired with constraint, and constraint grows more visible as environments evolve. Written into enamel is the lesson that power alone does not secure permanence. Teeth are tools of efficiency, not insurance against change. They reflect a moment when overwhelming force matched environmental generosity. Their persistence in the fossil record contrasts with the absence of the animal itself, underscoring the difference between dominance and durability. Megalodon also leaves behind a framework for understanding other extinctions. Its story aligns with patterns seen across time, where giants fade as energy budgets tighten. It helps separate extinction from failure, reframing loss as mismatch rather than error. This perspective deepens how scientists interpret the past and anticipate future shifts. There is caution here for the present. Modern oceans face rapid change in temperature, circulation, and productivity. Species that thrive today do so under conditions that may not hold. Megalodon's teeth, durable across millions of years, stand as reminders that adaptation must remain ongoing, not assumed complete. In the end, what Megalodon leaves behind is clarity. It shows how life responds when cost exceeds return, even for the most formidable forms. The warning written in teeth is subtle but persistent. Strength must remain sustainable. Size must remain affordable. When balance breaks, absence follows quietly, and the ocean continues, carrying forward only what still fits its shape. Time does not pause for reputation. Evolution does not shield what once ruled, no matter how complete that rule appeared. Legends hold no weight in natural systems. Only balance matters, measured continuously against shifting conditions that do not acknowledge past dominance. Megalodon existed because the ocean could afford it. For millions of years, energy flowed generously enough to sustain extreme power. Warmth, prey density, and open space aligned to make size profitable. Within that moment, Megalodon was not excessive. It was appropriate. Its disappearance marks not a fall from greatness, but the closing of an arrangement that no longer held. Nature does not preserve icons, it preserves function. When environments change, form must change with them or step aside quietly. This process is not cruel, it is indifferent. The ocean redistributed energy toward shapes that matched its new state, favoring efficiency over spectacle, flexibility over mass. Power did not vanish from the sea. It simply reappeared in different proportions. What remains striking is how undramatic the ending truly was. No final stand announced itself. No boundary separated dominance from absence. Presence thinned until it was gone. Strength persisted even as sustainability faded. The last moments did not feel final. They felt ordinary, carried forward by habit rather than climax. This is the quiet inevitability written into all long timelines. Systems evolve continuously, and those who fit them persist only while alignment lasts. When cost exceeds return, no amount of success can override the arithmetic. The ledger does not remember who once sat at the top. It reflects only current balance. Megalodon's story lingers because it confronts the idea that supremacy ensures survival. It shows that even the most optimized design can outlive its context. Power is not timeless, it is conditional. When the conditions shift, even perfection must yield. In the end, there is no loss to mourn within the system itself. The ocean did not become emptier, it became different. New relationships formed, energy found new paths, life continued without pause. Absence settled where presence once accumulated, and the sea carried on with no record of sentiment. What fades is not meaning, but expectation. The expectation that strength guarantees permanence. The expectation that size secures legacy. Megalodon leaves behind neither cautionary tale nor triumph. It leaves clarity. Life persists through compatibility, not memory. The ocean still reflects this truth today. Forms rise when conditions allow, and recede when they do not. Nothing is owed continuation. Nothing is preserved for what it once represented. Nature keeps no monuments. When power is no longer enough, there is no announcement. There is only transition. The sea breathes, adjusts, and moves forward, carrying with it those who still fit its shape and letting go of those who no longer do, without judgment, without ceremony, and without end.